So, how is everyone? I hope you are all well. So, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing what many people seem to have the inability to do, and that is being fair. You're about to listen to something. I want you to take a moment. It's a couple of minutes of your life, and on the grander scheme of things, we can give a couple of minutes if it helps us to understand certain things. But I'm not going to go into details about what it is. I want you to have a listen. So have a listen, and then I will catch you afterwards.
Entirely. All our interactions came in the form of the class, and not even like, office hours. Like, it was all within the confines of a lecture hall. He was pretty strict as far as grading goes. When he came into class, he was very, not super mentally present. He would stand up at the front, look at the ground. He had a lot of like boilerplate responses he would give people rather than, maybe something he had thought up on the spot. It seemed like he would be, he'd come in knowing what he was going to say to like most interactions. And then when he would grade your papers, he would be grading you on what he ended up calling like a higher standard. What it really felt like to us was he was grading us like he would have graded himself as a PhD student. And so that was just kind of like, we were all annoyed by him. And so I knew his name, I knew like, oh, T.A. Bryan, like he sucks at this. Like he's grading us too harshly. And that was like an annoyance. But obviously beyond that, we just thought he was a little weird and kind of, a bad grader. He actually only left me good comments, which is just kind of silly. Like the only ones I could send in were nice ones, but for most people, he was being pretty harsh in the comments. I just, for whatever reason, he was being pretty good to me. We had, our professor was big on the idea that like, if we're all going to be attorneys someday, then we have to know how to argue our case. And so he scheduled a day where everyone, came in ready to argue to get their grades up, and he brought in Bryan and he was like, all right, go at him. And he had Bryan stand up, and everyone was, like a few people were on his side because they wanted to keep their high grades and not like have questions be cut out or whatever. But for the most part, it was like, half of a 150 person class just asking him all these real critical questions, and he would answer. And he'd actually, he tried pretty hard to defend himself, which was the kind of thing that our professor loved. He wanted the like courtroom environment. And so there was just a period of class where we were all sort of arguing about this. It wasn't like yelling or anything, but it was certainly conflict, We just, it would have been about a month before winter break when like the murders happened. And we didn't obviously build our framework for this around that because we had no reason to connect him to that, at the time. But definitely around then, he started grading everybody just 100s. Not like you pretty much, if you turned something in, you were getting high marks. And he stopped leaving notes. It was just, he seemed preoccupied is what I would have said at the time. And now obviously he seems like he was probably pretty preoccupied, but it was much easier. You'd turn in whatever you wanted pretty much. And he was just grading them up and sending them back.
So, what we're going to firstly do is dispel a myth. And that is that Bryan Kohberger, when he was grading, this was primarily directed at females. There was an issue with females that many people have used to bolster their argument that what happened over in Moscow, Idaho was based on the fact that Bryan had some form of issue with females. There was something manifesting. It clearly was apparent in his work. Some people have gone on to as far as to say that he was fired from his job because of his issue with females. And what you've heard there is a male student clearly stating that it wasn't an issue with females. It was who Bryan was as an individual. He was someone who held everyone to a higher standard and was looking to push them. Now, could it be argued that he pushed them too far? Was it that he wanted just simply to make people the best that they could be? Was he just one of those teachers who was more strict than others? You make the decision. but I think it's fair to say that we can scratch off the issue with his marking and his studies were directed at females only, because that's not the case. But you will have heard two things in that, if you caught it, and that was that this person had been asked to send in their interactions with Bryan. So if they had any documentation surrounding how he had spoken to them, what he had written, and he said all I could hand in was good comments. It won't be the same for everyone, but that's all he could hand in. But it would seem that the prosecution are certainly digging in to Bryan's past and forming this character, this picture of who he was, leading up to, into, and beyond. But I don't know whether you caught something as well at the end, because this student, he was clearly saying towards the end that something happened. It would appear that something happened. Now, some people would say it's coincidence. But on the flip side of that, many people turn around and say, I don't believe in coincidences. And do you know what? What we can't do is be unfair. And that is allow the existence of coincidences, or the non-existence or non-acceptance of coincidence when it suits us. But this person has clearly stated that around the time that all this happened, the way in which Bryan conducted himself within that educational setting changed. He wasn't anymore the Bryan that they had all come to know and loathe, the harsh marker. They would just be able to hand stuff in and he would mark it highly, and that tells you something. I don't know how you guys receive that piece of information. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts down below. Because look, we've got a situation here where he did something or was involved in something, and he had, like this person states, he had a lot on his mind. But it's interesting that he still continued to live his life and something changed. He didn't continue being the way he was. So when this event happened, if he was indeed involved in it some way, it changed him. It altered who he was leading up to it. Now, if he'd have remained exactly the same, he continued being the harsh marker, and people were turning around and saying, we didn't notice any difference. That could actually be argued that perhaps he had done this before. Perhaps he'd done this before, this was another time, and nothing mattered to him. It was just who he was, and this was part of what he did as a person, and it wasn't going to impact him as a person. And that is, again, what some people have pushed. They've pushed that he could have potentially been a serial killer. He's done this before. But something happened here. Now, is it that this is the first time he did ever do anything like this? And it did change him because it released the valve. Something that had built up, he did something, and it was that release that, and that enabled him to function differently. Was it that he did this crime, he knew that he screwed up, and what we saw here was the burden of that on him, and it impacted him at work? Is it that he... I don't know, because my thought process with that is, if you knew that you screwed up that bad and how that could lead, and it was your first time doing all this, why would you continue normally? Why wouldn't he have run? Why would he have just not disappeared? Got in his car and driven away, gone on the run, hidden. But he stayed and he fronted it. But again, I uphold my thoughts that something changed within Bryan, or it would appear to. Now, could it be that he had been involved in the situation? He had been involved in it, he had turned up and seen what he had seen, and that is what changed him. But I think the fact that this person is saying that he was a harsh marker to everyone, like I say, that dispels the rumours that enables a lot of people to justify their thoughts towards him. And furthermore, the aforementioned change in his behaviour around the time of these crimes shows that something happened to Bryan himself as a person. Now maybe I'm reading into it too much, but I'd like you to tell me. Like I say, this channel is about being fair. It's about being fair and just. And as much as we can push the fact that we feel that someone else was involved, we also have to admit the real possibility that he had something to do with this. I have said multiple times I would find it very difficult to believe that he had nothing to do with it and there was no connection to this property, but my thoughts and feelings are that there is a different connection than the one that many people are trying to push, and bolstering that ideology with false information. But let's put all the chips on the table. When you start dispelling some of these rumours and pulling them away, what are you left with? When you take away the sexist, when you take away the traffic stops that just are normal, you're left with a normal person who was a TA, who wanted to push people to be the absolute best they could because that's who he was, an absolute perfectionist who needed to know everything. And that's what we saw with the traffic stop. Someone who was fighting their corner, they wanted to know the ins and outs of everything. Some people have alluded to the fact that perhaps he had some undiagnosed medical condition that meant that he scrutinised many things. But look, I'm not a doctor and I'm not going to go into that. You know, we can't go down that route, certainly. But some of his mentalities that you can perceive wrong, if you don't understand fully, could be explained by those sort of diagnoses. But we're here to dispel rumours, to look at how he changed in the aftermath of the event and ask ourselves whether, was it because he was involved and it had a severe impact on him? Was he scared? Was he afraid? Was it a release because he'd finally done the thing that he wanted to do for so long? Let me know down below. It's been a little bit different today. Catch you all in the next one.